Hey guys, it's Alex, and I'm here with one of my last top 5 videos of the year. I thought it would be cool if I sort of started wrapping up the year a little bit early and talking about what I've done on my channel this year. So with that in mind, I decided this video would be the top 5 books I've talked about too much this year. And these are all books that I've loved, so I don't really think there would be any possible way for me to talk about them too much, and I have absolutely no plans to stop talking about any of these. But these are probably the books that I've talked about the most on my channel, and that I think if you've watched me regularly, you probably recognize most, if not all, of these. The first book on this list is one of my favorites of all time, and that is Long May She Reign by Emerson White. This is the 4th book in the President's Daughter series, which is how I talk about this most of the time. I bring this up, I think, at least twice a month, regardless of if I've read it or not, because I haven't actually reread this book in a few years, although I plan to next year. It follows Meg, who is the daughter of America's first female president. Originally, this book was set in the 80s, but then it was updated and rewritten, and this book specifically wasn't written until the early 2000s, which is when the books are now set. And they're so well done. They're so well written. I love Ellen Emerson White's writing style. I love her incredibly complex characters, and this is probably one of my favorite books of all time. Even though this is on my books I've talked about too much list, I do feel like I need to talk about this book more, because as it stands, I haven't yet convinced anyone to read this, which just is a great tragedy in my mind, because these books are so good, and she's such an underrated author. I think next year I'm planning a read-along at some point for this series, so if you'd like to join in, let me know. Let me know if you'd be down for that kind of thing. I love these books, and if I do one thing on my channel, I'd just love to convince other people to read these books, because they're so good. So hopefully this will also be on my books I've talked about too much again next year, because I think it deserves to be talked about more. And if I'm the only one talking about it, then so be it. I'm just going to talk about it extra. The next book on this list is also YA. I think all of these books are, and for someone who says she reads a lot of adult fiction, I talk about YA an awful lot on this channel. But the next book is The Naming by Alison Croggon, or The Books of Pelennor. This is the first in the series, and I think for the most part I usually talk about this series as a whole. I love these books. I was never very much into high fantasy as a kid. When I did read high fantasy, it was much more like the typical medieval type fantasy, and this is more into like weird magic and demons, and the people who have magic are called bards. There are lots of like elf type creatures, and I don't read a lot of that. That is not what I'm into. But this book, this series is so good. I've read these a couple of times. I don't know that I've ever read the entire quartet all the way through. I'd like to at some point host a read-along for this one maybe, because it is more popular than The President's Daughter, but I don't see anyone talking about it except for Autumn of Pelennor. And Abby and I became friends, I think, in part because we bonded very quickly over our shared love of this book, because these books are so good. If you like young adult high fantasy, I'd highly recommend them. They're so worth a read. I do talk about these a lot, and I've actually specifically made videos just to talk about this and The President's Daughter. But again, I think this is a book that I'm not going to stop talking about anytime soon. And again, would like to host a read-along at some point, because not enough people are reading it. The next book on this list is Not Otherwise Specified by Hannah Moskowitz. This I've talked about on my channel a number of times, but I've also spent a lot of times talking about this book and recommending it in comment sections under other people's videos. I think this is the book I've recommended in the comments more than any other book. The way people talk about Becky Albertalli and some of the other YA contemporaries that are super hyped right now, I really think people would love this book. It's so well done. It covers a spectrum of rather difficult topics. The main character struggles with an eating disorder. She deals with a lot of biphobia from her friends who are gay. But it does it with a sort of lightness. This book never gets too heavy. It's not a book about issues. It's a book about a girl who deals with these issues, yes, but also she wants to be a dancer or an actress. And it focuses a lot on those things, while the eating disorder and the biphobia are very much important to her life and they affect her life, but they're not the central focus of the story, and it's so well done. Etta is a fantastic character. She's one of my favorite characters, and I think this is just one of those books that doesn't get quite enough hype, but I think if people picked it up and heard about it more, they'd really enjoy it, because I was honestly so shocked when I read this book about how much I enjoyed it. Going in, it sounded very good because I do like books about eating disorders, but this is probably one of the best eating disorder books I've ever read, and it's just all around a really great book. Next, I have more of an author than a book specifically, and that is Tamora Pierce. I did pick up Alanna, the First Adventure for this one, just because I think that's the book I talk about the most by her. But I talk about her other books a lot, and I talk about her in general. She's one of my favorite writers, and I have an entire shelf of her books. I've read almost everything she's ever written, and I really love her books. Alanna was the first book I ever read by her, and I honestly didn't really want to read it. I got it as a gift and sort of put it off for a while because a girl pretending to be a boy in order to become a knight doesn't so much appeal to me. But when I read these books, I immediately just started buying all of her books because they were so good. They're so enthralling. She does an amazing job of writing this entire complex world. It's not just a single country. She writes about country relations. She writes about world politics. But it's mostly focused on these female characters who are very strong women in a variety of different ways. And I love them. Her books are for the most part slightly older books because she's written so many for such a long time. But she has come out with books recently. Tempest and Slaughter she came out with just this year, I believe. I haven't read that one yet, although it's on my list. But I adore her. She's fantastic. She's amazing. And if you like YA fantasy and you haven't read Tamora Pierce yet, I highly, highly recommend these books. And of course, I recommend you start with Alanna. I think there is only one good place to start with her, and that is Alanna. And then, finally, this will surprise no one ever, but the final book on this list is Harry Potter. I do make an effort not to talk about Harry Potter very much on my channel. And by very much, I mean I talk about it less than I probably would otherwise, just because there's really no point in recommending Harry Potter unless the person in question is under the age of 10. And even then, they've probably still heard of Harry Potter. But people, for the most part, have either already read it or don't plan to. And that's fine with me. I don't think this is a book that everyone needs to read. It's fine. For me, Harry Potter is more about the nostalgia than it being a quality book. Because I honestly can't sit down and tell you that it is the best fantasy book ever written or one of the best books ever written or series. Just because I can't look at it that way. I can't look at it in a critical, analytical way. It's my childhood. These are the books I grew up on, and I aged with Harry. So I have a very special relationship with these books. But I do try not to just mention them in every top 5 list so that you get more of a variety. But I think Harry Potter will always be in the top 5 books I've talked about just because it's always there. It's always one of my first loves. And I don't want it to be any other way. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books or if there are any books you feel like you talk about too much on your channels. I feel like these are always the same books that I return to over and over again, even if there are other options that maybe I don't get to talk about as much, which I'll get to a little bit more next week. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.